Welcome to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie. After learning a ton about kidney stones and helping people prevent stones at the University of Chicago, I was fed up with all the terrible advice people were finding online. So I decided to do something about it. The Kidney Dietitian was born. This podcast is for people who want to learn what actually works to prevent kidney stones and still enjoy life, eating, and their favorite foods. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the 57th episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie. And today I'm going to be talking about a very hot topic in kidney stone nutrition, I think, and that is tea and kidney stones. Can people with kidney stones drink tea? Is it okay? I know that if you Google this, you are going to find probably hundreds of articles that say, no, tea is so bad for kidney stones. And there is even a pretty high chance that's a handout that your doctor gave you says that tea is bad for kidney stones. Yet, I am here to tell you that tea is completely okay for people with kidney stones. Yes, tea is actually associated with a lower risk of kidney stones. There is literally no data ever published that shows that people who drink tea have more kidney stones. So let's dive into a little bit about what the research says about tea and kidney stones and where this myth has come from. So like I mentioned already, that tea is associated with a lower risk of kidney stones. So this data is a bit outdated, but it's the most recent that we have. So a large study in 2013 that looked at thousands and thousands of people and looked to see who formed stones and who didn't. And they looked at all of the different eating patterns and things that they consumed and didn't and that sort of thing. So this study found that people who consumed tea at least once a day had a 20% lower risk of forming a kidney stone compared to people who drank it less than once per week. So 20% lower risk for people who had tea once a day compared to people who drank it less than once a week. And there are previous studies prior to 2013 that have found similar things, that people who consume tea have a lower risk of stones. So what in the world is going on? Why in the world do we tell people to not drink tea? And as always, it comes down to this largely unfounded fear of oxalate. So black tea is notorious for being, quote, high in oxalate. But honestly, if you look at the numbers, it's not even that high. Of course, you're going to get many estimates of exactly how much oxalate is in a cup of black tea. But the most reputable references that I have is that a 8-ounce cup of steeped black tea has somewhere between 8 to maybe 11 milligrams of oxalate. That is going to vary widely on the tea itself, right? So just like fruits and vegetables, the exact oxalate content that is in tea is going to be different based on where that tea was grown, when it was harvested, when it was made into tea, probably how it was made into the tea that you have in your tea bag. There's going to be a gajillion different things that are going to impact exactly how much oxalate is in the tea that's in your kitchen. And probably the biggest thing that's going to impact the oxalate amount of the tea that you're drinking is how long you steep it, right? So if you very quickly put that tea bag in and out, there's really not a whole lot of chance for that oxalate from the tea to get into the liquid that you are drinking, aka the tea, right? But if you let that steep for an hour, say, you're going to have very strong tea, and definitely a lot more of that oxalate is going to be pulled out into the tea that you are consuming. Am I saying that you can only dip your tea bag into your tea? Absolutely not. The point of this episode is that tea is okay for people with kidney stones. So just steep it the normal amount that you would want to steep it and drink it and move on with your day. But we'll learn a little bit more than that, I promise. So that's black tea, right? It's really not that much oxalate, maybe 10-ish milligrams of oxalate per cup. That's about the same as an orange. Like oranges are completely fine, right? And it's really hard to put that 10 milligrams of oxalate into context because there's really no published amount of oxalate that we should be consuming per day. Unfortunately, a lot of doctors are telling their patients to consume 50 milligrams of oxalate per day, which is bananas, in my opinion. There's basically no way to put together a healthy meal pattern consistently that consumes 50 milligrams of oxalate or less. So I think this is truly dangerous advice to be giving our patients, but that is neither here nor there. Or sometimes people will say, 100 milligrams of oxalate is okay to eat, but this is all made up. Like, there's literally no data to show for how much oxalate we should be eating. There's no data to show like people who consume less than this amount or more than this amount form stones or not, because honestly, the data shows that people who consume a diet that has more oxalate, aka more fruits and vegetables and whole grains, have a lower risk of stones. So it's really, really hard to put this 10 milligrams of oxalate per cup of black tea into context, but just to kind of help us, it's really not that much, right? People always ask about all the other millions of other kinds of tea out there. It's impossible for me to give you accurate answers of exactly how much oxalate is in the different kinds of tea. I've seen estimates for green tea that have somewhere around 6 milligrams of oxalate per cup or so of green tea, not that much. Herbal teas generally tend to be a lot less. I've seen like average estimates of around 2 milligrams of oxalate per cup, so like basically nothing. So the point is there's really not that much oxalate in black tea, right? Or any kind of tea. It's not really that much. Yet this fear of oxalate that we've been operating under for basically the entire existence of kidney stone medical care has led to this myth, honestly, that people with kidney stones can't drink tea. Because again, the only data that we have is that tea drinkers have a lower risk of stones. And certainly there's an argument to be made, right? Correlation does not equal causation, right? Just because these people drank drank more tea, maybe it didn't cause that lower risk of stones. But when we have a correlation that shows the opposite of what people are saying, that definitely is a red flag, right? Like when we don't even have an association to show that people who drink tea have more stones, I think that definitely is a problem, and we should not be telling people with stones to drink less tea. So why might stones be associated with a lower risk of stones? And truly, it likely just comes down to adding more fluid, right? Drinking more fluid, getting more fluid in your day, and increasing the amount of urine that you produce and diluting that urine is reducing your risk of stones. In the study that I mentioned earlier, and I'll certainly link to that in the show notes, and every other study that has looked at which types of beverages are associated with a lower risk of stones, they've basically all found that drinks that do not contain sugar, all of them are associated with a lower risk of stones. So coffee is the same thing. There's no reason that people with stones need to stop drinking coffee. Of course, we don't want to be drinking a pot of coffee or tea for that matter per day, because all of that caffeine could be associated with other health risks like high blood pressure. But having a couple cups a day is completely fine. Again, really just because it's adding fluid to our day and diluting our urine, which is always the goal of kidney stone prevention, whether it is by drinking more fluid, so that's going to get your body to produce more urine, or by changing your dietary components, right? Maybe eating less salt, maybe eating less dietary non-dairy animal protein, maybe eating more calcium or whatever. All of those things are aimed at reducing the compounds in your urine that are going to form stones, right? All of those things are aimed at, getting there to be less oxalate or less calcium in your urine. But, right, so always the goal is to be reducing the supersaturation in your urine of whatever's going on. And for a lot of times, people are making stones simply because their urine is so concentrated. They're just not drinking enough. And so we see that when people drink more, no matter what it is, unless it is a sugary drink, people have less stones. Always people will say like, oh, Melanie, what about that diuretic effect, right? Doesn't it just kind of like negate itself because it's going to dehydrate us because of the diuretic effect of that caffeine? And the answer is not really. So like tea and coffee do have like a slight diuretic effect, but it is so little. The actual volume of the coffee or tea that you're drinking, like the actual fluid that's associated, massively like makes up for that time and time again. So the diuretic effect is true, but when you look at it in real life, it doesn't really matter. It's not actually dehydrating, and it's because you are still getting that fluid. So just wanted to throw that out there. So really the only concern with any drink is when we have added sugar, right? So we do see a higher risk of stones in people who consume regular soda or who consumes sweet tea. Sweet tea I am concerned about because of the sugar, not because of that oxalate content. Certainly we see a higher risk of stones for people who drink a lot of things like fruit punch or sugary juice. There even is sometimes a higher risk of stones with some fruit juices. So I'm not opposed to juice. I think juice is fine. I would certainly much prefer you eat your fruit, right? Like a whole piece of fruit is always going to be much better for you because it has all that fiber compared to a cup of fruit juice. So I'm not opposed to juice, but I don't think that this is something that people should be drinking tons and tons of, just because even if it is 100% fruit juice, it is still sort of a more concentrated source of that added sugar than an actual piece of fruit would be, just because of that added fiber, plus the way that you drink it, right? Like you can down 16 ounces of orange juice, no problem at all, but it would take you a long time to eat the equivalent of 4 oranges. And so, just kind of thinking about it that way too. So yeah, tea is completely fine. We have this, this myth out there that is probably never going to go away, no matter how loud I scream from the rooftops, that tea is associated with a lower risk of stones. But we are so afraid of oxalate, which is unfounded because there's no data to show that reducing how much oxalate you eat reduces your risk of stones. People are so afraid of it. There's this fear of oxalate in tea, which is really, honestly, could be doing harm to people, because if people love tea, there's no reason that you shouldn't be drinking it. Now, all that being said, if you take this and you say like, oh great, I'm going to go back, I'm going to be drinking gallons of tea a day, maybe that's not a great idea. Just like anything, honestly, right? Like variety is the spice of life, and variety is so important in nutrition for so many reasons. I think tea can be a great way to add some extra fluid to your day, but honestly, just if we look at the caffeine alone, it probably isn't a great idea to add a ton of tea to your day. So having a couple cups a day, completely fine. Another thing to think about is if you are still afraid of oxalate, no matter what I say, I think something you could do is add milk to your tea, right? So we know that if we pair some calcium with the food or beverage in this case that we're consuming, a lot of that oxalate is actually going to get excreted in our feces and not get absorbed, because it's going to bind with calcium in that milk or whatever calcium it is that you're consuming with the tea. So I think we can pretend that we're British, right? Or maybe you are British listening to this podcast. I am not, but I did love having milk in my tea when I was in England many years ago, 5 years ago or so. So we could totally do that as well. And I would also just be mindful of how much sugar you're adding to it. So if you are a big sweet tea drinker, that is something to consider, maybe limiting or maybe cutting back how much sugar you add to your sweet tea, because my understanding is that there can be quite a bit of sugar, depending on who's making it, added to that sweet tea. So the only concern when it comes to which beverages are okay for kidney stones, it really just comes down to that sugar. It's that added sugar is the only thing that seems to be associated with a higher risk of stones. Everything else, tea and coffee included, really is just great extra fluid that is actually going to reduce your risk of stones. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that helps you enjoy maybe a refreshing glass of iced tea, which is one of my favorite things. I love iced tea. On a hot summer day, that's one of my favorite afternoon drinks. Hopefully that helps you enjoy your favorite beverage with, a little bit less stress. That I'm always here to help us just enjoy eating and just look at the actual science and be making these decisions out of actual data and science and not fear. So again, hopefully that helps, and I will close this episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast, and I very much look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for listening to today's episode. For more help with kidney stones, check out my website, www.thekidneydietitian.org. For more personalized help from me, check out my online course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. VIP enrollment includes help directly from me. I can't wait to see you there and help you prevent kidney stones. Have a great day.